Hello again. Kenneth Latourette, History of Christianity, page 352. The Carolingian Revival. Christian living and the inner life and unity of the Church were furthered by the great Carolingians. For about 2 centuries, the Carolingians brought under their sway much of Western Europe, including, at the widest extent of their realms, the larger portions of what are now France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Western and Southern Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, perhaps half of Italy, slight footholds south of the Pyrenees, and much of the east coast of the Adriatic. Their rule stretched from the Elbe to Barcelona, and from the North Sea to south of Rome. Their power reached its apex under Charlemagne, and was symbolized by his coronation as Roman Emperor by the Pope in Rome in 800. Compared with that of the Caesars of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Charlemagne's empire was a small, impoverished, and semi-barbarous affair. In splendor, it was far inferior to the contemporary Byzantine Empire, the Abbasid Caliphate, and the waning Tang dynasty in China. Yet its glories dazzled Western Europeans. The Carolingians assisted the Christianity of Western Europe by giving a measure of peace and political unity to a fairly large area, by actively furthering improvements in the Church, and by an alliance with the Papacy, which gave protection to the Roman pontiffs against local enemies in Italy, especially the Lombards and unruly factions in the city. The earliest of the Carolingians who rose to prominence, Pepin of Heristal and Charles Martel, had no very deep religious interest. Indeed, in his pressing financial needs, the latter appropriated some of the property of the Church, a move which is not surprising in view of the fact that in his day, through the gifts of generations of benefactors, about a third of the land of the realm is said to have been in the possession of ecclesiastical institutions. However, Pepin of Heristal and Charles Martel were quite willing to give moral support to Willibrord and Boniface in their missionary labors, for these would aid in the extension of Frankish political power. The 2 sons of Charles Martel, Carloman and Pepin the Short, who succeeded their father on his death in 741, were more religiously minded. Indeed, after 6 years, Carloman retired to the monastery of Monte Cassino, leaving Pepin in undivided control. They reinforced Boniface in his efforts to reform the Frankish Church, and much of his success was due to their aid. Beginning with Clovis, the Frankish rulers had exercised a large degree of authority over the Church in their realms, and Pepin wielded this to improve the quality of the clergy and to strengthen the Church's discipline. In the age of disorder, the custom of holding annual synods of the bishops, summoned by the king, had almost lapsed. Synods now became more numerous and acted vigorously to improve the morals of the Frankish domains. After Boniface retired to resume his mission among the Frisians, Chrodegang, bishop and later archbishop of Metz, continued his reformatory labors. Outstanding among the Frankish bishops of his day, he was zealous in cleansing the Church. Pepin the Short also established relations with the Papacy, which accrued to the benefit of himself and the See of Peter. For several years, the popes had been in a very difficult situation. They were threatened by the Lombards. At the same time, they had broken off relations with the emperors at Constantinople over the iconoclastic issue. Under Pope Gregory III, who held the chair of Peter from 731 to 741, or in other words, during the later years of Charles Martel, a Roman synod had excommunicated the opponents of the icons, and in retaliation, the Byzantine emperor, an ardent iconoclast, had exercised his authority to remove Sicily and such portions of Italy as he could command from papal jurisdiction. In theory, Rome had been under the emperor, but the breach now severed that connection, and Gregory III was the last pope to seek and be given the approval of the Byzantine emperor for his election. Gregory turned to Charles Martel as the most powerful Christian political figure in the West for aid against the Lombards, but in vain. Pepin the Short was more friendly to the Church and the Papacy. He asked of Pope Zacharias, who succeeded Gregory III, approval for relegating the last of the Merovingian Rois Fenians, I hope I got it, to a monastery and the assumption by himself of the royal title. He thus seemed to say that the Pope had the right both to depose monarchs and to grant crowns, a principle which was to be of enormous importance in succeeding centuries. Pope Zacharias gave the requested assent. In 752, Zacharias was followed in the papal chair by Stephen II. The Lombards were a growing menace. In 751, they had taken Ravenna, long the seat of the exarch, the chief representative in Italy of the emperor, and were threatening Rome. Stephen journeyed north to seek the aid of Pepin, and was housed in a monastery at St. Denis near Paris. There he crowned and anointed Pepin, confirming the earlier coronation, said somewhat debatably to have been by the hands of Boniface. He also anointed Pepin's queen and the king's two sons, Carloman and the future Charlemagne. In return, Pepin waged 2 campaigns in Italy against the Lombards and compelled the latter to turn over to the Pope their recent conquests from the emperor, including Ravenna. In granting these lands to the Pope, Pepin the Short is usually regarded as having inaugurated the temporal power of the papacy and the estates of the church. This status the popes have claimed from that day to this, although it was to be sadly weakened in the 19th century. The step was not as revolutionary as might at first sight appear. As we noted when we spoke of Gregory the Great, the Church of Rome had long held vast properties which it administered, widely scattered in Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and Gaul. To be sure, in theory, these were within the structure of the Roman Empire and thus were subject to the emperors. In practice, however, the popes had managed them through an elaborate bureaucracy, almost as though they were independent. Because of the decline of the imperial power in Italy, the popes had been the chief defenders of the city of Rome. Gregory the Great, for example, had raised armies for protection against the Lombards. Even with these qualifications, the action of Pepin was highly significant. Next we get to the reign of Charlemagne himself. I'll put in a link to an Old Testament parallel to all of this, which is the claim of King Ahab of the northern kingdom of Israel to the inheritance of Naboth, his neighbor, whose land he coveted. So this is all about, of course, the stealing of the inheritance, which was in itself guaranteed by the law of Moses, God's law. See you next time for Charlemagne.